Hello there. Today we're going to talk about building a major scale. If you already know how to do that, then this video probably isn't for you. However, if you don't know how to do that, then you might learn something new and cool today. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, let's start building a major scale. Wait a minute, what is a scale anyway? A scale is a specific pattern of whole and half steps that ends up being a certain number of notes. In this case, the major scale is 7 notes. And then it repeats. It's just a repeating pattern of whole steps and half steps. To illustrate that, let's look at this diagram. Now you can see I've got a series of numbers here, 1 through 8. 8 and 1 are really the same number, and they are connected by a series of W's and H's. W's are whole steps and H's are half steps. So the pattern for the major scale is, and always ever will be, whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. So between 1 and 2 there's a whole step. Between 2 and 3 there's a whole step. Between 3 and 4 there's a half step. Whole, whole, half. Between 4 and 5 there's a whole step, whole. Between 5 and 6 there's a whole step. Between 6 and 7 there is a whole step. Between 7 and 8 there is a half step. Whole, whole, half. So really it's 2 combinations of this whole, whole, half, and they're joined together by a whole step. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's the easy way for me to remember it. You might come up with something that works better for you, but that's how I work. Now, right now I've just got numbers in here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Really what we care about are notes, so let's start replacing numbers with notes. So let's replace the 1 with C. And then using what we've learned about notes, we know that a whole step from C is D. So C, D. D is 2. C is 1, or also called the root. Between D and E is a whole step. So we have 1, 2, 3. C, D, E. Between 3 and 4 is a half step. A half step from E is the note F. C, D, E, F. Between 4 and 5 there's a whole step. A whole step from F is the note G. Between 5 and 6 there is a whole step. A whole step from the note G is the note A. Between 6 and 7 there's a whole step, and a whole step from A is B. And between 7 and 8, or 1, they're the same. There's a half step. A half step from B is C, and now we have completed our pattern. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. This is the C major scale. Now we call it the C major scale because the root of this scale, or the 1, or the 8, they're all the same note, is C. Now you'll notice that they're not exactly the same C because 1 is a whole series of the scale higher than the other. It's called an octave. On a guitar, that would be illustrated like this. That's an octave. That's what an octave sounds like. It's a specific interval. Intervals are measurements of half steps. So, let's get to what that would look like on the guitar. If we started on C, we could just go all the way up. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Now, while that's cool and everything, most of the time it isn't very practical. So if we started on this C, we're going to learn the pattern that I call going down. For me, I can either go forwards, backwards, or down. Sometimes up, depending on where the scale starts. But when I talk about patterns that way, I'm talking about physically. The root's here. My hand's going to stay in pretty much the same position, and it's just physically going to move down, closer to the floor. If I'm going back, then I'm going back towards the nut, and my root's going to be here, but position-wise, my hand's going to be behind it. If I'm going forward, then my root's going to be here, but I'm really going to be dealing with stuff out here. So let's take a look at some of that. Here's an example of the pattern for a major scale. You'll notice that my hand stayed in basically the same position all the time. When I say position, I don't mean where I'm putting my fingers down specifically in that pattern, I mean the fact that when you're playing in terms of position, this would be called second position, and it's because my first finger would be on the second fret, and each of the rest of my fingers would just line up on the frets following that. A lot of times you don't necessarily think about playing in position, you just do it. But if anyone ever talks to you about that, that's what they're talking about. So not only could you learn C in the C major scale, you're learning C major scale in the second position, which just makes it sound all that cooler. Now, this scale's modular, it's mobile, which means just like how we could move a chord, we can move that same scale. C major scale, because we're starting on C. If we start on D, D major scale. Now, it's cool to be able to play that, although it's also good to know what notes are there in the D major scale. I'm not going to tell you what those are though, I'd kind of like you to figure them out. So your assignment is to figure out the notes in other major scales, like particularly keys that you like to play in. So if you've got songs you like that are in D or E or A or G, then I would suggest figuring out those major scales. It'll be real helpful. You'll start maybe to recognize some patterns of things. You know, particularly noticing what's the 1, the 3, the 4, the 5. That will really help you out. Christmas is just around the corner, and one of the things you'll find out is those old dudes that composed all those Christmas songs that we sing all the time, they used major scales. All those notes in the major scale. Major scale, nothing but the major scale. Major scale. You can get all sorts of cool stuff like that working through the major scale, or even if you're just grooving on a Sunday morning. Let's say you're playing a song that's in D and you've got kind of a thing going in D. That sounds cool. But if you could add your D major scale knowledge onto that, now I know I've got these open strings, so just as something simple, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that D major scale, I'm just going to add some of those notes on top of my chord and switch between my chord and some of the notes in that scale. You can get the idea. You can do some really neat stuff with that. And then once you start expanding that scale and learning, well, I could do it here. But from what I know about notes, I can figure out that I can also do it here. Or I could do it here. It just gives you a lot of stuff to work with. Work out a few major scales. They're kind of fun to play around with. Thanks.